He's got an upset stomach today. So, if I don't read very much or get up and go real quick, you'll know what's going on. Little Men, Chapter 20, Round the Fire. What? Round the fire. With the October frost came the cheery fires in the great fireplaces, and Demi's dry pine chips helped Dan's oak knots to blaze royally and go roaring up the chimney with a jolly sound. All were glad to gather round the hearth as the evenings grew longer to play games, read, or lay plans for the winter. But the favorite amusement was storytelling, and Mr. and Mrs. Bear were expected to have a store of lively tales always on hand. Their supply occasionally gave out, and then the boys were thrown upon their own resources, which were not always successful. Ghost parties were the rage at one time, for the fun of the thing consisted in putting out the lights, letting the fire die down, and then sitting in the dark and telling the most awful tales they could invent. As this resulted in scares of all sorts among the boys, Tommy's walking in his sleep on the shed roof, oh my gosh, and a general state of nervousness in the little ones, it was forbidden, and they fell back on more harmless amusements. One evening, when the small boys were snugly tucked in bed and the older lads were lounging about the schoolroom fire, trying to decide what they should do, Demi suggested a new way of settling the question. Seizing the hearth brush, he marched up and down the room saying, "Row, row, row." And when the boys, laughing and pushing, had got into line, he said, "Now, I'll give you 2 minutes to think of a play." Franz was writing and Emil reading the life of Lord Nelson, and neither joined the party, but the others thought hard, and when the time was up were ready to reply. "Now, Tom," and the poker softly rapped him on the head. "Blind man's buff." I thought it was bluff. "Jack, commerce, a good round game, and have cents for the pool." "Uncle forbids our playing for money, Dan. What do you want?" "Let's have a battle between the Greeks and the Romans." "Stuffy." "Roast apples, popcorn, and cracked nuts." "Good, good," cried several, and when the vote was taken, Stuffy's proposal carried the day. Some went to the cellar for apples, some to the garret for nuts, and others looked up the popper and the corn. "We had better ask the girls to come in, hadn't we?" said Demi in a sudden fit of politeness. "Daisy pricks chestnuts beautifully," put in Nat, who wanted his little friend to share the fun. "Nan pops corn tip-top. We must have her," added Tommy. "Bring in your sweethearts, then. We don't mind," said Jack, who laughed at the innocent regard the little people had for one another. "You shan't call my sister a sweetheart. It's so silly," cried Demi in a way that made Jack laugh. "She is Nat's darling, isn't she, old chirper?" "Yes, if Demi don't mind, I can't help being fond of her. She's so good to me," answered Nat with bashful earnestness, for Jack's rough ways disturbed him. "Nana's my sweetheart, and I shall marry her in about a year, so don't you get in the way, any of you," said Tommy stoutly, for he and Nan had settled their future child fashion and were to live in the willow, lower down a basket for food, and do other charmingly impossible things. Oh, the screen is so dirty. What? Let's put my cleaner back in there. Demi was quenched by the decision of Bangs, who took him by the arm and walked him off to get the ladies. Nan and Daisy were sewing with Aunt Jo on certain small garments for Mrs. Carney's newest baby. Whew, y'all, it's freezing cold in here. And this is going to make a terrible racket, but only for a little bit, I hope. Sometimes if I smack it just right. It'll get better in a minute. I'll wait till it calms down. Come on. Stop that noise. There we go. Let's see. Newest baby. Please, ma'am, could you lend us the girls for a little while? We'll be very careful of them, said Tommy, winking one eye to express apples, snapping his fingers to signify popcorn, and gnashing his teeth to convey the idea of nut cracking. The girls understood this pantomime at once and began to pull off their thimbles before Mrs. Joe could decide whether Tommy was going into convulsions or was brewing some unusual piece of mischief. Demi explained with elaboration. Permission was readily granted, and the boys departed with their prize. "Don't you speak to Jack," whispered Tommy, and he and Nan promenaded down the hall to get a fork to prick the apples. "Why not?" "He laughs at me, so I don't wish you to have anything to do with him." "I shall if I like," said Nan, promptly resenting this premature assumption of authority on the part of her lord. "Then I won't have you for my sweetheart." "I don't care." "Why, Nan, I thought you were fond of me," and Tommy's voice was full of tender reproach. "If you mind Jack's laughing, I don't care for you one bit." "Then you may take back your old ring. I won't wear it any longer," and Tommy plucked off a horsehair pledge of affection which Nan had given him in return for one made of a lobster's feeler. "I shall give it to Ned," was her cruel reply, for Ned liked Mrs. Giddy-Gaddy and had turned her clothespins, boxes, and spools enough to set up housekeeping with. Tommy said "thunder turtles" as the only vent equal to the pent-up anguish of the moment, and dropping Nan's arm, retired in high dudgeon, leaving her to follow with the fork, a neglect which naughty Nan punished by proceeding to prick his heart with jealousy, as if it were another sort of apple. Sorry, I'm warming my hands. I feel so good. The hearth was swept and the rosy Baldwins put down to roast. The shovel was heated and the chestnuts danced merrily upon it, while the corn popped wildly in its wire prison. Dan cracked his best walnuts, and everyone chattered and laughed, while the rain beat on the window pane and the wind howled round the house. "Why is Billy like this nut?" asked Emil, who was frequently inspired with bad conundrums. "Because he is cracked," answered Ned. "That's not fair. You mustn't make fun of Billy 'cause he can't hit back. It's mean," cried Dan, smashing a nut wrathfully. "To what family of insects does Blake belong?" asked Peacemaker Franz, seeing that Emil looked ashamed, and Dan lowering. "Gnats," answered Jack. "Why is Daisy like a bee?" cried Nat, who had been wrapped in thought for several minutes. "Because she is the queen of the hive," said Dan. "No, because she is sweet." "Bees are not sweet." "Give it up." "Because she makes sweet things, is always busy, and likes flowers," said Nat, piling up his boyish compliments till Daisy blushed like a rosy clover. "Why is Nan like a hornet?" demanded Tommy, glowering at her and adding, without giving anyone time to answer, "Because she isn't sweet, makes a great buzzing about nothing, and stings like fury." "Tommy's mad, and I'm glad," cried Ned, as Nan tossed her head and answered quickly. "What thing in the china closet is Tom like?" "A pepper pot," answered Ned, giving Nan a nut meat with a tantalizing laugh that made Tommy feel as if he would like to bounce up like a hot chestnut and hit somebody. "And y'all, I'm going to have to go to the bathroom, so I'll have to finish later. I know that wasn't much at all. Sorry. Go away. Go away. Come on, thing. A bellyache is a terrible thing. Love y'all. Sorry.